67 years old, a Country Music Hall of Fame medal around his neck, and Marty Stuart's response was to sign a new record deal, pack his bags, and book a European tour, not as a farewell run, not as nostalgia, as a continuation. That single fact tells you more about this man than any biography could, because for most artists, the Hall of Fame is where the story ends. For Marty Stuart, it turned out to be somewhere around the middle. Born on September 30th, 1958, in Philadelphia, Mississippi, Marty grew up in a small southern town where red clay hills kept the rest of the world at a comfortable distance. His mother taught the Bible with precision and conviction. His father worked the railroad with calloused hands but carried something unfinished inside him, pouring that unfinished thing every evening into the sound of a mandolin. Between those two forces, church hymns on Sunday mornings and raw country music bleeding through an old AM radio after dark, a boy named Marty Stuart found the only language that would ever fully belong to him. By age 5, while other children chased each other through yards, Marty had already retreated into a private world of sound, picking up his father's guitar and sitting with it for hours without anyone telling him how. He absorbed music the way dry ground absorbs rain, studying Hank Williams to understand how a single word could carry the weight of an entire story. Learning from Flat and Scruggs and Bill Monroe that silence between notes was its own kind of language. His grandmother understood this before anyone else did. One quiet afternoon, she looked at him and delivered the sentence that would anchor everything that followed. "You are an artist," she told him, "and you must never let anyone take that from you." When Marty was 12, she took him to see Connie Smith perform at a music festival. The moment the stage lights fell on her, something shifted permanently inside the boy, and he whispered to his mother a promise everyone nearby dismissed as childish fantasy. One day, he said quietly, "I am going to marry her." Nobody believed him. Marty filed the promise away and kept moving. That same year, he began growing his hair long, dressing in black, and speaking about country music with the intensity of someone who had chosen a religion. In a conservative rural Mississippi town in the early 1970s, this read as a warning sign. Friends drifted, teachers shook their heads, neighbors whispered about the Stuart family's troubled boy, and none of them understood that what they were watching was not a child coming undone, but a child preparing for something enormous. In 1972, Roland White, a member of Lester Flatt's band, caught Marty playing during a gospel performance and extended an invitation that thousands of adult musicians would have wept to receive. "Come play with Lester Flatt," he said. Marty was 13 years old. He packed a small bag, held his mandolin against his chest, stepped onto a tour bus, and left behind his parents, his younger sister Jennifer, and every ordinary thing that childhood is supposed to be made of. He would later call that departure a small tragedy, and those two words carry a weight that decades of subsequent success never entirely dissolved. Nobody on board treated the 13-year-old as someone who needed comfort. Lester Flatt's world had exactly one standard. Can you play? Marty answered it night after night, not merely with technical correctness, but with something that felt like necessity. His teenage years unfolded not in school hallways, but in smoke-filled bars and fairground stages, and on the long, dark American highways where solitude becomes the most reliable companion you've got. There were hotel rooms in unnamed cities where he sat alone after the crowd had gone home, asking himself what exactly this dream was costing him. The answer never changed. He never considered turning back. When Lester Flatt's health forced him off the road in 1978, and when Flatt passed away not long after, Marty lost the man who had functioned as his second father and the first great anchor of his professional life. A spot opened up beside Johnny Cash, and Marty stepped into it. Cash was already a monument, a figure whose gravitational pull could quietly dissolve whoever stood near him. 6 years alongside Cash, and Marty was not dissolved. He learned how to convert pain into art, how to look directly at your own darkness and drag it forward into the light as melody. By the time he stepped away from that band, the Prodigy from Mississippi had become a thread in the fabric of American music history. In 1985, Marty released his first solo album, Busy Bee Cafe, a record not engineered for the charts but offered as a plain-spoken confession, rooted in traditional bluegrass and weighted with everything a man who had traded his childhood for a tour bus at 13 had accumulated along the way. Nashville does not pay for declarations. It pays for sales figures, and Busy Bee Cafe produced almost none. His marriage to Cindy Cash could not hold the weight placed on it, the shadow of a legendary father-in-law, the instability of two young people who had never been granted the luxury of simply growing up, and by 1988 it had quietly ended. Columbia Records compounded the blow by shelving his second album, Let There Be Country, entirely. Marty packed his belongings, left Nashville, and returned to Mississippi to play gospel music with a group from his youth. People who saw him there saw a man who had traveled a full circle of fortune and arrived back at the starting line. What they could not see was the precise nature of his fire. Success feeds certain kinds of ambition, and failure extinguishes them, but what burned inside Marty was older and more fundamental than ambition. Sitting in the silence of that failure, the fire did not go out. It burned lower and hotter, and something clarified inside it. To be rebuilt, a person sometimes has to accept coming apart in the form they have known. In 1989, Marty Stuart walked back into Nashville, signed with MCA Records, and released Hillbilly Rock. Country music at that moment was being smoothed into something radio-friendly and safely forgettable, and Marty arrived as a deliberate act of confrontation. Rhinestone suits straight from the 1950s, hair slicked back like a challenge, a sound that collapsed the walls between honky-tonk and bluegrass and rock and roll into something unapologetically alive. Hillbilly Rock broke the top 10 and earned gold certification, and the 1990s opened before him like a decade that had been quietly holding his place. The defining creative partnership of that era arrived in Travis Tritt. Together they launched the No Hats Tour, a loud public assertion that authenticity was worth defending. Their duet, The Whiskey Ain't Working, released in 1991, earned them a Grammy Award and became an anthem heavy with the weight of men who had tried everything to outrun their pain and finally admitted that the pain stayed exactly where they left it. Their 1992 joint album, This One's Gonna Hurt You, stands as one of the defining records of the decade. Marty had proven something that almost defied logic. He could occupy the center of the mainstream without surrendering a single honest edge of who he was. That same year, the Grand Ole Opry opened its doors to him, and for the boy who had climbed onto a tour bus at 13 with a mandolin and a small suitcase, stepping into that institution was history closing a circle. A Grammy followed in 1993. The Country Music Association honored him again in 1996. On July 8, 1997, the promise made by a 12-year-old boy watching stage lights fall on Connie Smith came true. They were married. The world responded with predictable skepticism, the 17-year age gap becoming fodder for cynics who measured numbers loudly and missed what those numbers could not capture. Two people worn down and rebuilt by this industry, who had found in each other something quieter and more durable than a romantic fantasy. Connie brought Marty what a turbulent youth on tour buses had never given him: faith and stability and a home that was an actual place. The promise had kept. In 1999, Marty made the most artistically courageous and commercially devastating decision of his career. He released The Pilgrim, a concept album built around the true story of a man from Philadelphia, Mississippi, who had ended his own life over unrequited love. Inviting Johnny Cash, George Jones, and Emmylou Harris to lend their voices, Marty wanted to create a country opera, a sustained examination of love and sin and redemption. Nashville had no appetite for it. Radio stations declined to play it. Audiences found it too demanding and too heavy. To them, it read as a step backward. To Marty, it was the most honest work he had ever made, and that distinction is the entire story of what makes genuine art difficult to sell and impossible to dismiss. By 2000, he had parted ways with MCA Records, not as someone discarded, but as someone who had finished the story he needed to tell inside that system. The new millennium arrived with digital noise and factory-assembled pop stars, and the industry closed its doors with quiet finality. In 2002, Marty assembled the musicians who would become Marty Stuart and his fabulous superlatives: Harry Stinson, Kenny Vaughan, and later Chris Scruggs. Critics would eventually call them the best live band in America. On stage in hand-embroidered suits, every show became an uncompromising confrontation with mediocrity, a weekly argument that country music deserved to be defended. In 2005, Marty founded his own label and released Badlands, Ballads of the Lakota, a tribute to the Sioux people of the Pine Ridge Reservation, music he spent years earning the right to make by living among them and sitting with their stories. That same year, he produced Porter Wagoner's final album, an act of filial devotion and a statement that giants may age but must never be left to silence. The Marty Stuart Show launched in 2008 and ran for 14 years, keeping music live and honest in an era saturated with manufactured spectacle. A Grammy for the instrumental Hummingbird in 2011 confirmed that time had not diminished him. In 2017, the Americana Music Honors named the Fabulous Superlatives Group of the Year. In 2018, he co-curated an exhibition drawing from his personal collection of over 20,000 country music artifacts, objects as irreplaceable as Johnny Cash's boots and handwritten Hank Williams manuscripts, preserved by a man who understood that if he did not protect them, they would simply vanish. The Country Music Hall of Fame induction came in 2020, and the medal settled around the neck of a man whose hair had gone silver, but whose eyes still carried the same fire that had propelled a boy with a mandolin onto a tour bus half a century before. 2 years later, he signed with Snake Farm Records and booked a European tour because the Hall of Fame was never going to be a place to stop. It was a milestone. The journey was something else. Most recently, a slip on ice gave him a sprained wrist and a small fracture, and forced a pause he did not choose. He announced the postponed shows with the self-deprecating humor of someone unafraid of looking human, writing on Instagram that there are slow hands, lucky hands, winning hands, and then there are his hands, which had managed to get seriously injured on a patch of ice. The worst part was being unable to play guitar or mandolin. The request was simple. Please forgive the canceled shows. The Superlatives and I will be back as soon as we can. Behind that stillness, hands wrapped and healing while the stage sat dark, the most revealing image in his long story emerged quietly. Marty Stuart, waiting with the patience of someone who has spent a lifetime being worthy of what he loves. Back in Philadelphia, Mississippi, Marty and Connie are building the Congress of Country Music, and what they are building is not a museum. It is a school, a living center where children from the American South can come and touch history and pick up an instrument and begin to believe that music is capable of changing the direction of a life. He is not building it to preserve his own name. He is building it to repay a debt to the land that formed him, to the grandmother who told him not to let anyone steal what he was, and to every hand that reached down when he was young and pulled him forward into the light. The life of Marty Stuart, from Philadelphia, Mississippi to the Grand Ole Opry, from a 13-year-old on a tour bus to the Country Music Hall of Fame, from a shelved album and a gospel group in his hometown to a Grammy shared with the woman he had promised to marry at age 12, is not ultimately a story about talent, though the talent is extraordinary. It is a story about what happens when a person refuses, through every loss and reinvention that a long life can produce, to become something other than what they truly are. He was never the loudest voice in any room, but he was always, without exception and without apology, completely himself, and in a world that rewards volume and punishes stubbornness, that is the rarest and most admirable thing a human being can be.